What's up, everybody? Kevin Allen here from DFSArmy.com. I'm here to break down another single game showdown contest on DFS Army. Tonight we're talking about the Vikings, we're talking about the Seahawks going at it in Seattle. Very exciting game to target for tonight, but before we get started, obviously you can check out the article on DFSArmy.com. But the idea of this video here is to also function as a little bit of a tutorial on how to use our Domination Station Optimizer to set up 150 lineups for the Showdown contest. Here's the basics: 46-point over/under. You've got the Vikings road underdogs, 3-point underdogs. So in essence, a neutral game for both of these teams. You can read the write-up. We'll go through all of the player stuff here in a minute. Let's take a look at the Domination Station and remember again how this works. So we're going to choose Fanduel. We're going to choose single game. We're going to pick out the game for tonight. Now, using the Domination Station, in essence, we have two areas to check out. The MVP tab will control our MVP exposures, and the Flex tab will control our Flex exposures. So let's go through these player by player. And the first thing I look at are the projections. Like, we want to target players in the captain position that have the potential or will or are the most likely to be the highest scoring players on the slate. So if you just look at the straight up projections, and these are 1.5x projections, in essence MVP projections, we see that Wilson, Cousins, Thielen, Diggs, Lockett, Carson, Dalvin Cook are all on the list. And I'm going to add in, now I think Baldwin won't play, but I'm going to add in, even like Tyler Lockett, for example. Even though his projection is a little bit lower than some of these other players, overall, I think A, without Baldwin, and B, just his explosiveness, he could be a potential MVP as well. Even Jaron Brown and David Moore have outside chances of getting there. So that's going to be the group I'm going to take a look at. I'm not sure that I'll get all the way to these two, let's call them turds. All right. We'll start by setting the projections. And I think the easiest way to start is just, I always like around 25% for each of the quarterbacks. So we'll just stick with that formula for now. We'll see how it comes together. We want some Thielen. I'm going to go a little bit higher on Thielen. Let's go 15%. Diggs will go a little lower, probably a little less likely to break the slate. Chris Carson, if it's a defensive battle, he could be the guy. Dalvin Cook, outside shot that he could be the guy. So we've got 10, 20, 30, 80, 95, and we can put 5% on Tyler Lockett. Boom. I might shift these around before the contest starts, but this is a pretty good start. So we've got, remember, notice what I did here. On the MVP tab, I set my exposures using the min exposure setting. Okay, now we're going to go over to the flex position, and we're going to go through these guys player by player and get a sense of this particular slate. So let's jump over to the research station and start to get a feel for the players. Ratings wise, very interesting here that the QB rating for Kirk Cousins, the DFS Army Rocket Arm rating, is much higher than that of Russell Wilson's. Now the narrative tonight is that Kirk Cousins sucks on Monday Night Football. He's not good in prime time. I'm not a big believer in those narratives. We saw Cousins last week not have a great game against the Patriots, but the Patriots defense has been good. It's shockingly good at home. So, you know what? I'm gonna chalk it up. Now, this is not an easy place to go in and play in Seattle. And we also saw last night what happens when a defensive battle takes place. The running backs do well, not a whole lot, else goes really well. And we saw it last night with Goff and the Rams just not really doing a whole lot at all. So let's try to figure out why Cousins is getting a better rating. Because that's interesting for me. I'll take a look at the salaries. Cousins, I guess, is a little bit cheaper. Let's take a look at the projections. a little bit lower. So not much of a different projection there. Let's roll over. Let's see what's up here. All right, there we go. And now you see why. So basically, the Vikings have actually been the better pass defense, allowing only 16.6 Fanduel points per game to opposing quarterbacks, whereas the Seahawks are a little more vulnerable, allowing almost an extra point per game. That's not huge. I think the bigger reason why the rankings are so different, and I'm not sure that this is a fair enough measure to really judge this game by, because there's other factors in play here with Russell being able to do some work with his legs. But basically, this is a really awesome stat in the research station, where it will take the average passing yards per game achieved by this quarterback versus the average yards per game allowed by the opposing offense and come up with a number. We want this number to be higher. So the number with Russell Wilson is very low, A, because Wilson doesn't throw for a whole lot of yardage each week, and B, because the Vikings don't give up much yardage. But again, got to almost throw it off the table because Wilson's so incredibly efficient, throws very few passes, throws a lot of touchdowns, and we'll show that. Let's look at the rest of the players in the game here. This is what I like to do just when I'm breaking down the game. Once again, ratings. Makes life easy when you can see a rating for a player. And our highest rated player here is none other than Dalvin Cook. Very interesting. Now, Cook and Chris Carson, same salary. Cook is projected a little bit higher. Let's just take a look defensively at the numbers. Both, here is our average offense plus defense. You got receiving and rushing yards per game. So, looks like a projection for a little more receiving yards for Dalvin Cook, maybe not as many rushing yards, and the opposite for Carson or the Seattle running offense, where they might run for a little bit more. It's not that dramatic here. Let's look at points per game allowed, and there is your big difference. The Vikings only giving up 18.6 Fanduel fantasy points per game to running backs, whereas the Seattle Seahawks are giving up 22.7. So, again, defensively, Seahawks giving up a little bit more to the running back position. All the defensive metrics so far favor the Vikings, but remember, this is a home game for Seattle. Once again, big ratings for Thielen and Diggs, and negative ratings for all of the Seattle pass catchers. Doug Baldwin in orange indicates he is questionable for this game. He may not play. If he doesn't play, I think Lockett is going to move into the slot with Moore and Jerron Brown working in as super turds. These guys are going to be, I mean, look what they did. Look at the salary. Look at the salary. They jacked up Moore and Jerron Brown knowing that maybe Doug Baldwin might not play in this game. So, brutal. Brutal move. Brutal move, Fanduel. Brutal move. All right. Let's just take a look at the numbers to prove that, in essence, the rating is right. Because, hey, trust but verify, guys. Don't just trust things. Verify. Understand why. You want to understand why. And look at, there you go. Seattle giving up the 19th most points to opposing wide receivers, 31.3 points per game, whereas the Vikings only give up the 6th fewest points to wide receivers, 24.7 points per game. It's all right here in the research station. This is an awesome tool. So, kicker matchups, does this matter? Probably not. Seabass projected a little higher. Cool beans. Seabass is the home team. I always like kickers on the home favored team, so yes, I would pay more for that. All right, let's look over here while I reload the tight end matchups there. Start looking at our player pool on the flex side. And first thing I like to do is run the tool. Let's call it 100 lineups, because we're going to enter the quarter game with this. I'm going to run it and see what happens. We've already set our MVP exposures. Those are set. So let's take a look at what happens when we just run the tool as is. Get a lot of Thielen. plenty of Cook, Cousins, Russell, Vinette, super turd. A little too much Murray. A little too much Treadwell. You don't want too much of these super turds. Not enough Tyler Lockett. J.D. McKissick, way too much. Guy doesn't play. Let's take a quick look over at Fanduel. One of the things I like to do is see who's been playing lately and how they've been playing. So before I really start to get too deep, now we know Wilson's playing, he's doing his thing. He's actually been very, very good for a long period of time. Not as exciting as a Mahomes, not getting you the 35s, but doing just very yeoman-like quality performances. Outside of a couple of rough weeks early in the season, 18-point minimum each week. Not too bad at all. We've got Kirk Cousins. He's up and down, way more volatile, has bigger games in him. There's the 34 and the 31, but also has a lot of turds in him. And, if he's crushing, one of the things about Kirk Cousins is they really only throw to 3 players. I mean, maybe if you add Dalvin Cook in the mix, it's 4, but it's really Thielen, Diggs, and then maybe a little bit of Cook and a little bit of Rudolph. So they don't have the kind of offense that spreads the ball around that much. So a lot of times if Kirk Cousins is doing really well, you'll note that on his big games, Thielen or Diggs usually are having even bigger games, which kind of tells me almost to reduce Cousins a bit in favor of these other two in my flex. But we'll see if we do that. Now Thielen didn't have the best week last week, but again, he continues to produce, gets lots of targets every single week, can blow up at any time. This is definitely a guy we want a lot of exposure to. Diggs, injuries lately, does not carry an injury designation, so it looks like he's fine. Let's look again at the game logs. Lots of targets here too. Everybody talks about Thielen getting all the targets. Diggs gets plenty of targets, just not quite as efficient with them, but his scores are not that different. Like, everybody loves Thielen. Diggs, not that different. Tyler Lockett doesn't get a lot of targets, but when he does a lot of good with them. Now, without Baldwin, probably this week, he should get a few extra targets. He's the top pass catcher for Seattle for me by far. Chris Carson getting his 18 carries 18 touches every game. He's a volume guy. We're looking into the status of Rashaad Penny. Find out what his deal is. He's questionable right now. If he's not playing, I guess that's better for Carson. Probably even better, though, for Davis. Dalvin Cook, doing fine. Not getting a lot of carries, but getting plenty of targets, and I expect more of the same. They kind of bring in Lats Murray for like the shitty carries. 11 for 30, not much in the passing game work. You might see Lats Murray on the goal line, so he's definitely a threat to Vulture. But more than that, I think it's Dalvin Cook's backfield. Now with Baldwin probably hurt, we're going to have to look at Jerron Brown and David Moore. As you can see, big upside. That's Jerron Brown. But very low targets. These are definite GPP plays. We want to control exposures. Don't get too crazy. Here's Moore. He gets you an 18.3. He gets you 0. Has a couple of big games. Also, some turds. So, got to control exposures to these two, and I'll show you that as we get to the player selection portion. Kyle Rudolph. More targets, less targets, never does a whole lot. This is not captain potential for me. I mean, you never know. His price is low enough, though. He'll be in the mix. Both of the kickers, of course, Lats Murray never has a big game anymore, but has that potential to score the touchdown where that could lead to a decent game. You've seen a couple big ones without Cook, but since Cook has been back, very sketchy play, 10%er at best. Mike Davis, if Rashaad Penny is out, Davis becomes a decent play. Not somebody I'm super excited about, though, if Penny plays. Vinette and Dixon, a couple of super turds that we can consider. Alderic Robinson's also considerable. Let's take a look at Alderic and what he does. 9 targets against New England. Didn't do much with it, but that's a lot of targets for Aldaric Robinson. So I'm going to call him the number 3 de facto. Because Laquon Treadwell, as my friend Pulpo in Slack refers to him, the turd, doesn't do anything, ever. Fuck Laquon. Of course, this will be the game, so no more than 5% exposure. Everybody else here is pure garbage. We don't want to touch them. Okay? These people probably aren't in the domination station, so let's take a look at the player pool here and see if those guys are even there. No, most of those guys are going to have 0 projections, but if they come in with a projection, you could just uncheck them. Chad Beebe, let's take a look. He has a projection. He's out. So we're just going to uncheck that guy. J.D. McKissick, out. One of the ways to check if a player's out, if you look at points and it's a 0, they're probably not playing. So here's our pool. The cheapest guy is Treadwell, Vanette Green, Aldaric Robinson. Let me go up the list. Okay, that's your entire player pool. One of the reasons why these are so winnable is there's not that many players. Just not that many. So I like to run 150, and as you run it, we're going to start to see players popping too much, and I'm going to show you how we control the flex position. Got to let it run. It's going to work each quarterback exposure, then it's going to go through the others, you'll see. And you could check your flex exposures here. Right now we're getting a lot of Cook, a lot of Thielen, lots of Cousins, lots of Diggs, too much Vanette, way too much Laquon, probably too much Baldwin on a guy who I don't think he's going to play. I'm going to assume he doesn't play for the purpose of this video, and I'm going to remove him. The reason he's still showing up in the optimizer is because he hasn't been rolled out. He's questionable. Just because Adam Schefter thinks he's less likely to play doesn't actually mean that he won't play. And again, I'm not getting enough Tyler Lockett. So let's start working these a little bit. So number 1, I want to put a like onto Lockett. He is not popping nearly. I'm going to actually put a love on it. You have to pay attention to this number. Another guy I'm going to put a love on is Chris Carson. Actually, let's set this at 13.5 as well, because I want to mix these guys up a little bit better. We're going to put some max exposure. First thing I'm going to do is change to tournament mode. Tournament mode functions specifically with max exposure limits to spread out the player exposure. So I'm going to set some exposures on players I don't want much of. Note, I'm doing these individually for these particular super turds. All of these guys, not Aldaric Robinson, he's a good player, just doesn't get much play. But for the purpose of this video, they're turds. Okay, we don't want too much of those guys. So now all of a sudden you're seeing a different mix. We raised up some projections. You got Lockett showing up. You've got Dalvin Cook. You've got Chris Carson showing up. You got a little less of some of these other guys. But more importantly, you're getting, look at the nice even exposure of the super turds that we set for max 10. You'll see the number will never go over what you set them for. Now, pro tip, when you're setting flex exposures, make sure you have the flex exposure tab clicked on. If you want to set MVPs, make sure you're setting it using the MVP tab and minimum exposure settings. You can also set MVP using max exposure limits, but you would have to zero out the players you don't want to use. It's not my favorite technique, but it works as well. So again, MVP tab to control the MVPs. Flex tab to control the flex. Now the idea here is to keep running it a few times until we get a distribution that we want. Check this out, okay? You have your flex tab. That shows your flex exposure. MVP tab shows your MVP exposures. Now, we got to think about it. Again, do we really want it exactly like this? I'm not sure. So, we'll have to think about it. Maybe it's too many MVPs. Maybe it's not enough. When we go to the All tab, you see your total exposure to different players. And right here you see like Seabass at 60%. Is there a 60% chance that Sebastian Janikowski is in the perfect lineup on the slate? I think there's a good chance. But over 50% seems like a lot. And what I'm going to do here initially, I'm just going to lower that number, okay? Now, you might say, how do you think of the number to lower to? I just lower it. You could have done a dislike on him, get you 8.6. That's a 5% decrease from their regular projection. So I'll do that. Let's see who else is popping too much. Chris Carson. A little bit too much Chris Carson. As I go back to my research station and I look at the RB matchup, it's better for Cook than Carson, right? You have a pretty good Vikings defense. So doesn't mean he can't produce, but I'm not sure I want that much exposure. I'm going to limit him to about 30%. I'm going to limit, I like Dalvin Cook here more than Chris Carson, to be quite honest. So I'm going to go 40% with him and run it again. Let's see what happens. Seabass still popping like crazy. That's interesting. Way more Seabass than what I want. So I'm just going to actually stop this. Let's go to 8.0. See if that makes a difference. This is how you run it and watch. The beautiful thing about the exposure screen is you get to watch. Seabass still quite a bit. I wonder why we and now Dan Bailey's popping up there. Got Lockett at 46%. So this is what I'm watching. Now I want a lot of digs. You have to decide how much of these players you want exposure to. I think the passing game for Seattle's in good shape. Xavier Rhodes is supposed to play, but he's been banged up. And the rest of the secondary for the Vikings has been pretty in tatters. So I do like the passing game for the Seahawks. I also expect that the Vikings are a tough team to run on. They have a very good run defense. Again, let's take a look. I just want to convey this point. We don't just say it. Vikings, better run defense, averaging 18.6 points per game to opposing running backs, whereas the Seahawks are giving up 22.7. Now, those numbers look close together, but those are averages, and the difference tells more. I mean, 8th ranking versus 21st ranking. So there is a significant difference. Again, this being a home game for Seattle gives them a little boost, but the overall matchup is better for the Vikings running game. Last night for the Showdown, I was very high on Cohen. He wound up being the nuts captain. I wish I used a little bit more of him in my captain because I was so high on him initially. But part of the trick here, when you're setting these exposures and you ask what's the formula, it's not a formula. You got to make decisions. You got to make your own decisions. You want to follow what I do? Great, but shit, I might change this before I'm done. I keep editing until the last second. I have a sickness. I never think it's perfect. And I'll just edit it over and over and over again. So if we think, like, for example, that Cousins may not be a 25%er, maybe if you want to lower him to 20%, get another 5% going on Diggs, another 5% going on Lockett, no one will have him, that kind of thing. You know, when you do Lockett for 5%, you only get 7 lineups. So maybe you want 10%. When you do these guys, you only get 15 lineups with each one as a captain. So you better hit the right one. We know Wilson has been better and more consistent all season. We know the matchup is better for Cousins. So, you know, I like to do a little spread here, but however you want. Well, let's see where we're at with our exposures right now in the flex. Again, Lockett 48%. I like Lockett a lot. He's one of my favorites. Seabass came down in the end, so that's fine. Dan Bailey, yeah, I'm good with that. I still want a little bit lower on Seabass than I usually go about 35% on kickers. Although in these sort of defensive type games, you can go a little bit higher than that. Just kind of checking out the exposures here. I want a little more Thielen. I definitely want a little more Thielen. I like a lot of Lockett. I think the most explosive players are Thielen, Lockett, and Diggs. You know, secondarily, Cook and I guess Chris Carson. So that's kind of how I'm going to set up my mixture. One of the things I like to do, and I'm just going to not take you all the way through this because this video will go on forever, But you've seen this is how we adjust. So I got to pull this guy out. This is how we adjust it. I'm going to do one more. I'm going to pull Baldwin out of the mix completely because I don't think he's going to play. Again, our super turds. David Moore not quite showing up as much as I would want. Even though he's a super turd, he should start with the other guy out. Who's the other one? Jerron Brown probably not showing up nearly enough. See, these guys have terrible projections, so you're going to have to force, you're going to change it, and then force them into your lineups. But we don't want too much. So let's say Moore, I go 11, Jerron Brown, 11. This is why we're getting so much Seabass, by the way, because there's no one in this range that was even viable. You know, Rashaad Penny may not play. So all of these guys have these terrible projections. And this is definitely the slate where you gotta have exposure to all these weirdos. Okay? You gotta have your Moore. You gotta have your Brown. That's who's gonna break the slate. They're way overpriced too, which is upsetting. Like, I would never, ever roster these guys on a full slate. But this is a single game, and you need the perfect lineup to win the cash. Of course, look what happens. I'm sure these two are just popping everywhere. Exactly. So we see we set that too high, so you go back down. Try it again. Oh, that was too high. What if I go 9? What if I go 9? Let's see how much we get. I usually try to control my exposures via projection adjustments first before I go to the max exposure limit. You don't want too many max exposure limits because at some point in tournament mode you set too many of those and the tool really won't run because of the way the math works for max exposure limits in tournament mode and how it looks at that. It's a rear looking thing. Alright, so we'll go 8.2. I'm going to change him to 8.2. I just want to keep lowering it. I'm going to say about 15% exposure to each of those guys. And again, that's going to change if Baldwin is active. But for now, I'm assuming he's not for the purpose of this run. And I also want to show you guys a little bit of the process of how you keep adjusting the DOM until you get what you want. Rudolph, he's a 10, 15%er, not a 40%er. So we're going to keep lowering that projection until we get him where we want. Lockett, Cook. Again, I'm just watching it as it runs. There's more. Brown, 30%, still too much. So we're going to go 7.8. 7.8. And I haven't even gotten into stacking yet. I don't do a ton of stacking in single game showdown mode, but there is some merit to considering stacks. Like, Cousins is only going to be the MVP if 2 of his pass catchers are going off. So there is some thought of, at the very least, stack Cousins with at least 1 of his pass catchers. I've done it with 2, but 2 of his could go off, but then a different pass catcher could go off even more. And if he's not in your lineup, so I don't know that I want to lock him in with Diggs and Thielen together, or Diggs and Rudolph, or Diggs and Cook. But it is probably going to take 2 of his guys having big games for him to have a big game. Because if not, then the wide receiver himself will be the MVP, not the quarterback. If Thielen does so much that he's the MVP, but Diggs doesn't do anything, then or if both Thielen and Diggs are producing massive scores, Cousins will probably be the MVP. If that makes sense. But I don't like to do too much stacking in these single games because weird shit happens and you don't want to limit yourself too much. All right, this is looking a little bit better. Now you've got a pretty nice mix in the flex. Not enough Thielen. I'm going to raise him up. Still too much Brown. We'll adjust that a little bit down. Again, still too much of these guys. I'm going to go all the way down to 7. Like I said, I want exposure on Brown and more closer to 15%, and I definitely want a little more of the quarterbacks and Thielen and Diggs and the studs. So let's see what happens if we run it again. And this is how it goes. It takes a little bit of time. I'll spend many more hours doing this before finalizing on any sort of a mix. There's Seabass popping again. Dolph, way too much Dolph. And again, we can control this using max exposure, but the first thing I try to do is control it using projection adjustments. There's Danforth. Bailey a little too high, so we're going to lower this to 7.4. I'm going to lower this to 6.8. Where are these numbers coming from? They're completely random. I'm just adjusting to create exposures. I'm not here thinking that these guys are going to score a certain amount of points at that point. I've already decided by running it initially and looking over the player pool and everything, kind of how much exposure I want to each player. I just want to mix because I'm making 150 lineups. I'm trying to win the contest. So, you know, that's the approach here. It's not about, hey, I want to play the best matchup all day. I'm trying to win the contest. And winning the contest isn't playing the best matchup. It's finding the perfect lineup. Getting enough exposure where we elevate exposure on players we're more certain about and reduce exposure on players we're less certain about. It's that simple. Think of it as a portfolio of stocks. I want to base it around Apple stock. Apple's really good. It goes up all the time. They make a shitload of money. So I want some Apple in there. I'm going to get my exposure higher. But if I'm going to take some chances on some crazy penny stocks or super turds, yeah, I mean, I'll put a few in there in the portfolio just in case one goes bananas and becomes the next Apple. But, you know, 9 out of 10 of them are going to go to shit. So we don't want too much exposure or else we're going to get burned. You want to set Jerron Brown for 100%? Here's the deal. If he goes off, you probably win the tournament. But if he doesn't, you're going to get a 0. You'll lose all of your money. That's how this stuff works. You've got to consider the risk. Look at these flex exposures. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Thielen, 30, Diggs, Chris Carson. I got my man Cook up here. You know, I might lower this a bit, but I just want to take you through the final step in the process. So I'm going to go to that now, assuming I'm comfortable with these exposures. And I'm not, and I will change it. Don't copy. I'm done. Select lineups. Download them all. Going to Fanduel. Grab those lineups. Open, upload. Now, for those of you who haven't done this, notice how much that was. $37.50 to put in 150 lineups. So when you hear people say, well, mass multi-entry, it's for rich people. Well, I don't have a bankroll for it. They're full of shit. There's quarter games. This tool allows you to do it in seconds. You want to sit here and churn out 150 manually made lineups? Go for it. My suggestion is if you like making lineups by hand, and that's great, don't go into this type of a contest that allows 150 entrants. Now let's look at the prize pool. I put in $37.50. If I take first, I'm going to split probably $1,000 with a bunch of people. Or, you know, this initial prize pool money with a bunch of people. So usually it'll be, you know, it depends on what first place is in these type of contests. There's usually massive ties, but a lot of times you'll end up being like, you know, $150. Okay. Fine by me. You get a lot of these lineups. In the style that I just showed, you're not going to get every lineup into the money. You just won't. You just won't. Now, if you wanted to kind of approach things differently, lower the number of MVPs that you use, but accept that the fewer and the less spread out you are, the less likely it becomes for you to hit the perfect lineup, and the more likely it is that you're going to lose all your money. But if you look at $37.50 as, it's like one entry into a $33 contest, but I just want to build around it, that's fine too. But just know, you have to hit the perfect lineup to win this contest. And another very, very important note, for those of you who hadn't mass multi, you're watching this and you're excited, I'm going to fucking mass multi-entry and it's awesome and I love that shit. All right, just know this. If you're not winning, you're probably losing money. And what do I mean? This style of play, when you enter 150 lineups and you spread your exposure around, looking and purposefully forcing turds into our lineup, okay? And let me just point out, it's a turd, 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 turd. These guys are shitty-ass low projection players that you would never use in your season-long fantasy football team. You would never want to use them on a main slate of games. But in the case of this game, when you're forcing these turds into your lineup, what you're doing is you're throwing away the lineups where they bring the zeros. It's a lot, 10, 20, 30, 40. Now this is a style of play I use for other games, MMA and different ones. I don't really do this for main slate football because you don't have to force garbage into your lineup. But in a single game format, this is what you're forced to do. Luckily, the tool helps us control it. And again, if I just wanted to control exposures, you saw me doing it via the projections, but you can also set exposure max for each player using the flex. Don't be scared to modify a projection. There's no magic in these projections. This is an NBA. Don't be scared. Modify the projections. Don't worry about it. If you ever feel like you got into trouble, did a little too much craziness, just go right here, reset settings, refresh projections, start all over again. Control exposures. Don't overexpose to any one crappy player. Don't overexpose to any one stud unless you want to make a stand. Sometimes you take a stand. All right, that's it for this video, guys. A little bit different today. Figured since I had a couple extra minutes, we'll do the video tutorial. I hope this helps. I'm not going to really do DraftKings. You know, all right. Since you're begging me, let's take a look at DraftKings real quick. We're 36 minutes into the video, and we're looking at DraftKings. Okay? Not going to show you this on the optimizer. It functions exactly the same way, but we can look through the salaries. Now, in our Monday Night Football Showdown SmackDown column, Josh points out a bunch of plays that would be good on DraftKings or considerable in the captain spot. Remember that on DraftKings, it is price sensitive in the captain position. So you see how the salaries double from, or 1.5x from flex to captain. And to me, I would use the same group of captains, Locke, Carson, and then I think you have to throw in these super turds, Jaron Brown and Moore. Moore, I guess, is the better of the two. Moore has played regardless, right? He's 5,200. Now, if Baldwin is out, that's where Jaron Brown steps in. But look at someone like Moore. Look at Brown. You want to win the contest? Be right about Jaron Brown as a captain. That's it. Now I got Thielen. Now I got Wilson. Now I got Diggs. I can throw some Seabass in there. You know how we love some Seabass. And I can get Kirk Cousins. How about all of the studs in one lineup with Jaron Brown? Simple as that. Seattle defense. You know how to do these. Defense last night was the winning MVP. I saw teams with two defenses in them get crazy with it. This is trying to win 100,000. You're 250K to first. When you're trying to beat 117,000 other lineups, get silly with it. If you want to be conservative, enter this contest. Now I'm gonna have to modify that lineup to a. All right, let's do real quick because I have to modify that lineup now anyway. Let's approach this as what's the safest lineup. Well, I definitely like to get both quarterbacks into a quote unquote safe lineup, right? Want to get at least the home kicker in there. Now, some people might want to use Seattle defense here. I don't know about all that, but if we can get an injury replacement report on someone, that would be nice. But who are the high floor guys? I like Tyler Lockett. I'm going to need another kicker in there, so let's just throw, or either we get a Jaron Brown in there, and then we can afford something else, or another kicker. You can get Dalvin Cook in here. Now I have some extra money left over. I'm not sure I like this, so I'm not going to enter this lineup yet. I'll work a little bit harder on that, but for cash games, we want to build as high of a floor lineup as we can. So, like I said, Dalvin Cook, he was on that list. I really want to try to get Thielen in here. I like Lockett. I like Wilson. I like Cousins. I like all these guys. Diggs. Not even sure I'm feeling it. So I rarely attack these single entry. I like to attack this type of contest with mass multi-entry, try to win those big tournaments. I think there's a lot of variance single entry, but there is some logic to building a high floor approach. Consider that. Yeah, if you do Bailey here, and then you have enough left for, not quite enough for Kirk Cousins. So I got to keep working on that. I'm not quite ready, and I don't think I want to work it out on this video anyway. So there we go. Little breakdown. Tonight's slate. Good luck, everybody. If you're not a DFS Army VIP member, you're watching this video, found it on the YouTube channel or something like that, you know, you're crazy. Why do you play DFS with one hand tied behind your back? Why do you play on DraftKings and Fanduel without the same advantages as other? I'm not saying it's such an... It's not that having the tools, having the information, having the research station, having the projections, having the optimizer, having coaches breaking down the slates, having late breaking news and all of that shit in one place for you, being force-fed explanations as to why players are projecting better. It's not that, basketball, every sport, golf, MMA, I mean, NFL, everything. It's not that it's a free money push button machine. It's that if you're playing without the tools, you have a hand tied behind your back, you probably never had a chance. What we're doing with DFS Army is we level the playing field. Everybody who's watching this video knows it. You have a shot. You watch the people, DFS Army members, they watch other members taking down big fucking contests every week. Just this weekend in NFL, we had Duster 10 win his ticket, second year in a row, to the DraftKings Fantasy Football Championships. $65,000 ticket. Guy has balls of steel. The path to getting to it was crazy. Ask him if you see him in our team forums. 5K winner this week. We had a 300K winner last week in NFL. That's just NFL crushing NBA on the regular. You have a chance. You see people around you, regular guys, taking down these contests using the tools, using the projections, using their own abilities. Why does one person win, another lose? There's a little bit of luck. There's a little bit of skill. There's a little bit of stick-to-itiveness. There's you bringing your own angles to things. So, no, we're not going to hand you lineups so that you can print money and easy money machine. That doesn't exist. Keep on walking. Okay, keep searching. That's not a real thing. But getting the tools and competing on a level playing field, that's something that you should do. Check out dfsarmy.com. Sign up as a VIP. Do it. What are you waiting for? All right, that's it for this one, guys.